Hi.
Hi. That was great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
So we're going to do a little Q&A kind of thing. And I've had a great time researching Eileen for like the past 10 days, you know, kind of doing internet dives and web dives and things like this, and it's been really fun. And what I came up with is this idea, maybe I'll ask you just a little bit to talk about this first, just preliminarily. So Eileen talks from time to time about language as lists. And I am really a space guy. Like, I see spaces first, and I understand things in terms of space first, proximity. For me, memories feel like proximities. And so what I wanted to do today was kind of make a map of a bunch of spaces and ask you if you would kind of meet me in the middle there. It's funny because, you know, I think I live lists more than you do. You maybe live maps more than I do, actually. So we're kind of crossover territory there. But so that's my structure. But if you feel like you want to say anything about language as a list, go ahead. And then if not, I'll just ask you some questions.
Okay. Well, I think at some point, I think maybe I was writing about a poet. I think I was interviewing a poet and writing an article for the Village Voice that just died about a week or so ago. And someplace in his, either in the conversation, I think he just said that every poem is a list. And I was like, wow. And then it struck me that that's absolutely true, because all it is like, you just, you know, or any piece of literature is just like this kind of long litany that gets tweaked, you know? So it's a little bit like you talking about spaces. It's sort of like, if there were a list and it was like, if it actually was kind of a internet type situation and you could just click on any word and it would open up into all these spaces. And essentially, I think a novel is that, a poem is that. It's just kind of like this conversation even. Like I said, if you had 6 questions and we have the first one and it's like, no. And then we go on to the second one and then it goes on for 15 minutes. You know, nonetheless, it's still a list. It's sort of like an amended list, a glorified list, but all the same. And I think one of the smartest people I ever knew, a writer by the name of David Rattray, who was a translator and an essayist and a poet, once came to my class at NYU, like the first class I ever taught, which was expository writing, which I knew nothing about, you know. And he happened to be like an editor at Reader's Digest Books at that time, as well as being somebody that spoke Sanskrit. We didn't speak, could translate Sanskrit, Spanish, German, Latin, the guy was kind of amazing. But, and I remember him standing in front of the room and saying, when you're doing research, the first thing you always do is make a list. You know, which is, I think, great advice about almost anything. You know, I think computer dating is essentially that too, you know? So I think it has endless applications, but I think all the world is a list. And even creation myths are too, you know? So, what the hell?
Thank you. Sometimes you take pictures of lists, actually. Is that the same list idea?
How do you mean?
Like sometimes in your Instagram there are little like post-it lists.
It feels so intimate. I just live off a wetboard as well as post-its too. But the wetboard is a really hot, lively one, you know, because I get points when I'm good and I do shit. You know, you get to like put your paw up there and wipe out, you know, Gloria or Greece or whatever it is that you've been plaguing over, and it's really fun to like. I think that, as we know, the internet has brought us cats, right? It's sort of like these animals that never go out suddenly are like really famous and very public. But I think that even you know, I think our homes are becoming that too. That it's sort of like the most private thing, and you're like, which I think is that fucking list, is suddenly that's socialized and you can give to people and share to people. And I find it comforting when I see other people's lists. And also, I've had the experience lately of selling my papers to Yale, and so I feel like they just have so many lists. And I feel like I want to get some of that shit out now while I'm alive. You know?
Thank you. So the first kind of space I want to talk about is, you know, born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, growing up. And this is a little bit preliminary, and maybe you could talk about it, maybe not. But many years ago at the gallery, we had a show that was called The Free Show. And it was somebody who, I invited a curator to invite many artists to put work in the gallery, and it was all free. It was all just given away. And Eileen wrote a beautiful catalog piece for this show, which was really transformative for me. She spoke about her dad, and she talked about, sorry, I'm trying to do
it's
this.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm into it, because it's conscious language, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
fabulous. You know, so talked about free spaces and what is a free space for you? Where do you experience personal freedom? You know, in this funny way, like, how do you assign yourself human rights in your own life as you go through your lists, right? But the first thing I want to ask you about is first memories, first spaces, first memory of language, first awareness of conversation, first possibly sense of freedom, if that's interesting, the first time you felt articulate or distinct or walking, down the street, that kind of temperature, like the things that might define memory for you now, like how did that start?
God. I mean, I felt the space was really contested when I was a kid. It was horrible, in fact. I was like, the thing of being the second born and having, and then there was a third born, so it was like having a room and then being forced to like leave that room and go to another room and share that room, and then sharing that room for your whole growing up, and so I think probably if I think about, I had such intense sentimental feelings about my desk when I was a kid, because it was sort of like somehow or other it was my space, and it was like this little thing that I didn't use it. I just kind of controlled it and kind of arranged it, you know what I mean? And I remember having like a rack, and then, it was the moment of 45 records, and so whatever the new record was, I would like prop it there, and there's the record that represents me at this moment in time. And I had a microscope, and I guess probably I did use it a little bit, but it was, more importantly, was the fact that this desk said, I am, and it was that incredible space, because I think that largely it was sort of like it was going to be violated, this room. My sister was going to come in, and we were going to have the wars of sound and light late at night. My sister was 4 years younger than me, and it was like, turn the light out, turn the radio off, turn the radio off, we both wanted one thing, and we didn't want what the other wanted, and it was so hard, But I think space has become radically important to me. But I had another answer that was better than that. No, I don't know what it is. It was really good. But I will just kind of race forward in a way, and we can connect to this later, because I think it was really hard to talk in school and growing up, and I feel like a really talkative person who spent years of being really silent, and at whatever point in my life I realized, I was sitting in a room full of people who were like talking and raising their hands and speaking, and I wanted to enter it desperately, but school, it was everything, I didn't know how to enter it, and at some point in my life, fairly late, I think probably in my 30s, I was sitting there and I was trying to figure out how to enter the conversation, and then suddenly I noticed what I was actually thinking. And for the first time I thought, what if you said that? I never knew that the way you went from private to public was this actual sharing of your interiority. In fact, I remember the first time I ever saw the word interiority, I was like, oh my God, that there was this thinking. I think they were talking about a priest talking about interiority. I think it was maybe in the Globe or in the New York Times, but it's like, the fact of that place and how to get from that space to this space was unbridgeable for a very long time. And when I realized that what made the unbridgeable bridgeable was to actually share what you had, it's like a radical revolutionary thought. And I think everything is like really, but it's like all great thoughts are great for me. I have to remember it again and again. Like paralysis and silence always comes back, and you're always stuck, and I'm always feeling irrelevant and not, what I think or know is not applicable to this until I notice that this is rush of things, and one of them is relevant for sure, and what's relevant, of course, is just the need to need to project, I think.
So did you, during this time in your life, did you have any sense, like were any of those moments, if you look back on any of those moments, were any of them clues that you were finding your story in any way? Like when did you write something down and know that it was something, you know, like I've talked to you a lot and you've said, you know, when I got to New York, I knew I wanted to write, and that's what I was doing. And, you know, I'm wondering about, you know, I'm sort of getting at, you know, you're someone who has written now for a number of years, and now people are really looking. They're really listening, and they're really looking, and you have sort of a notoriety and a voice, you know, and that probably wasn't always the case. And so there's this thing about like writing for no one, and then writing for someone, and are you always writing for no one at the same time anyway? You know, like it's sort of like humility and scale kind of question. But also, really, the question is like, when did you know what you were doing? You know, like at that point, was there anything happening?
Oh, I didn't know what I was doing at that point. I mean, I think that, but though I have such an incredible memory of being, my dad was a mailman, and so there was just a lot of crap coming from the post office into my home, whether it was stolen or who knows. I mean, one of the tragedy, the obvious tragedy of his passing was all those magazines stopped coming into the house. Everything. It was wild, you know? It was just kind of an amazing thing. But one thing he gave me was it was kind of like an insurance company. Maybe this was from my parents. It was like an insurance company, you know, like, you know, they give you diaries. They're diaries. And I was like, whatever the company was, there was like a deer with like antlers on the front of it, and it said 1960. And I remember them handing this to me. And I mean, like, you know, it's incredible to be a kid. It's like what constitutes a major gift is sort of unknowable. You know, you'd never know what the kid is going to go, oh my God. But this thing was given to me, and it was dates. The whole year was there. It was like half a page was a day. And I was like, you know, I can, you know, and again, I think it answers the space and the writing thing, because I was like, I couldn't believe that but yet what I did was so kind of crazy. I mean, like what I ate, and I would always be rating the day, C+ day, you know, and I went to Catholic schools, and the nuns had names like Giovanna, and it was like, Giovanna was weird today. You know, it was just like, and the weirdest thing is my dad died that year, and it did not get into the journal. Didn't think that, who understands trauma or space or you know, what constitutes an object worth writing about, but it just didn't even, and that always kind of puzzles and fascinates me, that it's sort of like, maybe it had no words. I think perhaps that's the truest thing, you know, but I think that journal was such an incredible, you know, it was just something that entered my life and changed it forever, you know, because I had someplace to go, you know, and true, it's like, I mean, like we used to, my family used to rent a place in Marshfield, as they called the Irish Riviera. You know, people couldn't afford. One day a year we would cross the bridge to Hyannis, you know, and everybody would point and like, "It's the Kennedys." You know? In fact, I've written about this, but I gotta admit, it's like so great. We'll never get to the next question. But my Aunt Anne, who had a Super 8 camera, managed to get into the woods around the Kennedy compound with her telephoto lens and take a picture of their party, and this Jack Kennedy's incredibly vulnerable head in my family home, and then suddenly some Secret Service guys came along and stopped her, but they let her keep the film. And it was so funny. It was like we would, every time she lived in Somerville and we lived in Arlington, but Somerville was like where my family came from. So we did our holidays in Somerville. We would watch home movies and stuff. And everybody always, inevitably, it was like, Kennedys, let's watch the Kennedys. We all just wanted to laugh our asses off at like fuzzy leaves, Jack Kennedy's head. It's a sad, beautiful story of my family. But there was something about Marshfield that I was going to tell. I know. So there I had the first room alone ever. I think somehow my family allowed me to go visit my aunt for 2 weeks as myself at 13, And even though there was no light in the room that I slept in, but there was a light in the hall. And I remember just sitting out in the hall with I think every writer has this, and every person who's ever kept a diary has this, that moment when it was just like the whole thing. I was like alone, I have my own room, I'm in the hall, I got my notebook, and I was just going forward. I had a life, And it was really kind of, I think, because certain conditions in a family make you feel like your body is not even separate. You haven't even started being, I was pretty old when I realized my mother did not own my body, and I was just like, but there was something real about that moment too.
Did I just read something that starts with "I am a Kennedy" that you wrote?
It's this, yeah.
Where is it? We should tell them where they can read.
It's in. I have selected poems.
Yeah.
I must be living twice, and there's a poem in there.
Great.
The refrain is "I am a Kennedy," because of course, I have a lot of information about the Kennedys.
So my next question, unless I'm kind of skipping around too much, is about New York, because to me it's sort of the second beginning. You've told me things about interesting jobs that you had growing up and other things like that, but so many people have this knowledge of this moment about Eileen landing in New York and beginning, like that kind of a thing. And so I wanted to just ask.
And now you have it.
Now you have it. So my next question is really about New York and that space, and sort of the idea. I think recently you told me about, or I maybe heard something about a discussion that you had about being in New York and being at a party and understanding something about accessibility with other writers, and that it was really nicely, I enjoyed listening to it, about somebody at a counter, and the girl that was working at the counter was doing something, and somebody else was in a band, and everybody, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then the other part of the question is, I anyway, during that time in my life, we're about the same age, I didn't even have a consciousness about this, but I was completely driven towards, I didn't even have curiosity about it, I was like an animal. I was driven towards conditions of otherness, of other states. I wanted to be high, I loved taking psychedelic drugs, I wanted to be up at night, not during the day, like anything that was, and it wasn't even really rebellious, it was just like, what is on the other side of anything, kind of thing. And I think, at least I have lived with an association about you being in New York initially as having something to do with either an interest in something like that, or that New York was that place, possibly for me. Anyway, so I'm kind of thinking about the space of New York, getting there, what was it like to be there, what did you feel like you were connected to or wanted to be connected to, and what was otherness, what was the other part of it? Like, so this is a voice, I have a note here about writing from otherness, queer, urban, female voice, like that kind of, so that's the kind of the grounding part of the question.
Well, the first thing was I just remember sitting in my, the city is a whole, the city is like the thing, kind of, like talking about lists. The city is a massive pile of things. It's the biggest list going, and it's like, and you sort of, in a way, you go to get lost in that list, and in a way, I think, become other. But also to be utterly alone, I grew up in Somerville and Arlington and went to UMass and commuted in college and just could not, and had such a, that sense of like that somehow or other that I was like supposed to do something to make my mother feel good about life or something, just like, again, I hadn't quite got, it was my life. So I kind of wanted it both ways, which I really struggle with, like getting what she needed for her, but somehow getting what I needed too at the same time, which was like, two things at utter conflict, So when I got to New York, and it was a beautiful accident because I got out of school and did the classic, 1971 backpack hitchhiking in Europe for 6 months thing, and I thought that it was going to turn me into some other thing or person, or enter the world, like in college reading James Joyce and Hemingway and all these people, they're all there, they were over there, so I had to get there to become one of them. And I got there and I was still me, and I was depressed and I was unhappy, and all the things that I carried with me I had with me in Boston and college and high school was still there, so it was not transformative. And I came back to Boston, and then I thought, the West Coast, went to San Francisco, had a complete breakdown. I mean, it was just like, kind of, I mean, again, because I had never been on my own before in my life. I mean, like, I went to Europe with friends from college, California. I went to San Francisco. I knew nobody, you know, and man, I just freaked the hell. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, I was kind of trying to write. I had this idea that I was a writer, but it was not, you know, I ran back to Boston with my tail between my legs for another year. And then finally went to New York. And in one of the things that I got to New York, and the thing that was weird was that, you know, every time you leave home, all your high school, college friends have a party for you. You drink, they're like, goodbye, goodbye. But I kept coming back. So I knew when I moved to New York, there was no going. I mean, also I knew the last year in Boston, if you've ever had the feeling, which is so great, that you go away, you come back, you go away, you come back, and you come back one time and you realize you're still gone. Yeah. You know, that you're not there anymore. You know, you're like, you're kind of a slightly spectral, you know? And so it's sort of like, I had to, you know, like, New York, I had to go there to like stop this ceaseless coming and going, you know? And so I finally remember getting to New York, and suddenly I realized my mother is not watching and I can do anything I want. And I was 24, I was fairly old, but it was just like that feeling like I can just do all the drugs I want, I can have all the sex I want, I don't have to have a job. I didn't want to lose my apartment. That was and rents were pretty low at that point in time. So I knew that at that time that it's like, I could stop work for a month. I could stop making any money for a month. That was okay. And beyond that, I was in deep shit, you know? So it was sort of like you're on that cycle of, but being in my apartment was just this radical reality. It was just like the thing I had longed for all my life, which was deep privacy, you know? And I remember thinking I loved Thoreau when I was in college, and I felt like, I'm like Thoreau. You know, because, you know, Walden, he was like counting things and how deep it was, and I was just opening my refrigerator, writing about what's in. I mean, it was all so cool and amazing that everything that surrounded me was put there by me, and nothing was going to change, and I was beginning, which was an amazing thing. And then I had this phenomenon, which I think is what you're talking about other people, because there was a band on the 4th floor, there was a playwright on the 2nd floor. And I guess my experience when I was in college was that everybody I knew was going to write a novel, was taking dance classes. Like everybody seemed to be on their way to something, but they weren't doing it. They were kind of almost going to do it. So when I got to New York and somebody on the 4th floor was in a band, I was like, the band on the 4th floor, it was Blondie. You know? It took me a couple of years to realize these were not bullshit artists, these were artists, you know? And it's like, the people that I met before may or may not have been, but it was like, I was not, you know, I was thinking about it, dreaming about it, riding around in the car with my college friend, drinking beers and saying I could write in that house, you know? And it was like the people in my building were actually, and everybody I met, and it's so funny because I've watched generations of people come to New York, and it's almost like, the more privileged you are, the more cursed you are with this thing, which is that I'll see somebody come from Yale to like New York and get a job at some art magazine and be like an editor with like no experience, but you're like, you know, just beautiful and from Yale, and, you know, and sort of like, and she gets this great job. And even though we're all her dyke friends and she's a dyke, she doesn't believe that we're the people. It must be those people, you know? And you would watch this same kind of affect of not quite getting that what's close to you is actually the thing. You know, like you take poetry workshops, and it's not like, we're not fake writers, we're the writers. It's us, you know? And it was like that, I think that was the great revelation of early, late youth, was to understand that we were the people, you know, and to keep remembering that and keep acting as if, and even if they don't know it, we know it, you know, and that kind of our crowd thing really protects you and makes you have a community for the first time in your life, you know, and that space was like radical.
That's great. This is a little bit off that, but is there any correlation in what you're saying now, or did you notice or kind of or start anything then that would have to do with like you know, we talked a little bit about a room, interiority, these kind of spaces. Like, do you write spaces for people to be in when they read your work? Like, do you want people to be in a certain place as when they're in your work with you? is that how it's crafted? Is there anything about that? You know what I mean? It's kind of a vague question, but I'm sure you know better.
Well, I think it's the beautiful thing movies do for us, which is that we've all, just like through television and movies, we've all quietly been educated to visual language. Like nobody, it's sort of like, when Thomas Edison invented movies, or, I mean, like people before him invented them, but he gets the credit, but, and threw up a film of a train coming and showed it in a barn. Everybody screamed and ran out of the barn, Like, we're not those people, we kind of know that, like, two people are talking and suddenly we're sitting in this room and we hear a voice that couldn't be in this room, and suddenly there's a plane and you realize, oh, the voice is in the plane, and then suddenly we cut to, like, some beautiful rural place and you're like, oh, that's what they were talking, like we all have just become quietly really sophisticated in terms of lining up visual spaces all the time, and so I think that, again, I think it's always this amazing revelation to use what you know, but the problem that's so funny is that you actually don't usually know what you know, and it's sort of like, for me as a writer, it was, I mean, like, I saw it first in John Ashbery, where he would just be writing this poem and it would go from here to there to there to there, and it would sort of feel right, but how could it be right? And the more I learned about him and heard him talk about his work, he would say, I learned it from movies, that were always seamlessly, like, somebody's like this, and that makes a visual pun and goes to the next scene, and we don't even think about it, we're just sort of drifting. And to give myself, when I started to give myself permission in my writing to do that, to, like, just to flow from space to, all you have to know is where you are. You don't have to know even how you got there. You just have to, because the thing is, it's sort of like you're kind of, just making little soft loops to go from here to there, and the landing has to be solid. You have to know where the new place is, and it's sort of like you sort of don't, because we all forget, you sort of don't give a shit how you got there. You have to make the hallway, but it's sort of like, but you don't even want people to notice the hallway. You just want to get them to the next place, And it's sort of, it works in poetry, but it really works in novels, It's sort of, in a way, it's breaking some people's rules, but I think, again, you're accessing the language that we actually really use and think of.
And were there any other favorite forms, like opera or any other writing forms that you would feel were good for that kind of space making?
Well, I mean, I can't think. I want to go back a little bit because I think part of it is loneliness. Part of it, I feel like I'm Eileen. I'm from this such and such a working class background. I'm queer. I'm female. I was born in 1949. I don't know. I think we all feel awe about our existence on some level. And you think, and I just, like, nobody knows that I was here, and then I was here, and then I was here, and then I was here. And there's a loneliness of, I mean, I think it's really postmodern. Like, I think part of the addiction to lists publicly, like the 10 favorite things and the 10 best this and the 10 best that, is that nobody, I mean, like, when I was, growing up, it's sort of like everybody got Rubber Soul one Christmas. There was a Beatles album that everybody in America got. Like, it was sort of like, there was a TV show that everybody in America was watching one night. Like, I grew up in mass culture, and then suddenly I'm having my maturity in this other culture, which is total postmodernity, which is that nobody shares your list, sort of. Until you put your list out there, and you're like I published a book called The Importance of Being Iceland, and it's like, I'm obsessed with Iceland. It's art world, it's queer, it's a weird mix of things that I think nobody in the world is going to get this book. And all these people came up to me and were like, you totally get my list. You totally get it. And I was like, we find each other through these weird offerings. But I just feel like there's a desire for me, to overcome loneliness and overcome this discreteness, thinking, well, nobody exactly knows what this 68-year-old dyke from Boston that went to Woodstock would know, and it's like part of the dream of writing is to create the procession of those spaces and bring people through where you've been, fictionally or non-fictionally, so that it's almost like the Book of Revelation, so that all the graves, spit up, all the things that happen that seem unspeakable become speakable, and then you kind of, the thing that's weird is, by the time you publish a book, it's like a dead body. It's like, I already did all this shit. I already read those poems. I was like, when they were new, I read them. you know? And now they're old, and it's kind of like, it's like, because I love the body, and because we live the body of the new body that the poems have, and because we live in capitalism, you go marching around, you know, with the new book. But the thing is actually, you know, it's like the thing's dead body, you know? It's so weird. But the moment of a revelation happened each time I got a piece of it, you know?
So, I want to ask you about pronouns.
Sure.
Okay, and so, do you want to read this, or do you want to read? So, what I found, you know, there's a lot of great stuff about Eileen and pronouns to read and listen to and all that. I found something from a show that I happened to see that you wrote a catalog piece for that the catalog wasn't ready like forever, and I could never get one out of this museum. And so I found it, and I was like, oh great, this is that catalog, I can finally read it. And it was like the day before yesterday, and it actually talks about this here to here to here to here thing, because that was the nature of the show, and it also talks about pronouns in a really interesting way. So which I'm sort of that, I kind of have half a question there, like, do you want to read this, or?
Yeah, sure, because I can't remember what's in it, so.
So the show is, I should say, it was a show by an artist named Shannon Ebner, and it was
right.
the ICA in Miami, and a very interesting show, and I was able to see you read there, and it was just great to have the whole experience. So this is part of the catalog.
And Shannon, it's so great. Shannon's a photographer that uses language, and she's got kind of a big-ass career, but she was in, I taught myself to teach by having these little indie workshops in New York. I mean, like now I do or have taught at universities and whatever, but it's sort of like to learn to teach, I just kind of did a public do-it-yourself kind of workshop. And so I would have these people, these young writers, usually right out of college, you know, and it was pre-internet too, so you would stick like a flyer up in the bookstore, the gay bookstore, the performance space. There were like about 5 places that had walls covered with flyers, and you would stick your flyer up, and that's how the word got out. It was so analog. And Shannon, and so there were just various people that came into my workshops. Like Maggie Nelson was one of them, and we became very tight through that. And then they all became like major artists. And Shannon was a kind of a poet, but she was always taking pictures, and then she went to Yale and got an MFA in photography, and now is this kind of amazing visual artist. And so she had this show in New York. Her show was, well, I think I'll read this, and if it's not clear what the show is, I'll tell you about it. So this is from the catalog essay. But let me go large and general for a moment, back to Italy, because I'm thinking Shannon's work has an enormous relationship to graffiti, in its largeness, in its grossness. It isn't it, but it has the same relationship to passing, i.e. me walking under the underpass in Italy or onto the High Line to witness the very public ending of she and Reinfeldt's A Hudson Yard. I hardly ever passed the word she in my writing without wondering if Shannon is okay being a she. I'm not always okay with it. Why should she be? Like bodily letters, such as A, every pronoun is a kind of event. What's with all the A's? I definitely did kind of wonder in the present. Okay, here, she became obsessed with the letter A, and she did A. She made it poster size in all these different fonts, and then she had them wheat pasted all over New York, and then she hired a photographer to take pictures of people walking past the A's, and then they made giant photographs of that, and then they posted those on the High Line. It's kind of amazing. What's with all the A's? I definitely saw the A's all over New York for a while, and I thought, what's going on here? I didn't know it was Shannon's even. What's with all the A's? I definitely did kind of wonder in the present passing year. Little pregnant men? I mean, I can't imagine anyone beginning an alphabet with a woman, especially a woman giving birth. The fullness of his belly, language, just seems to predict the whole train. So when Shannon wrote a chronology somewhere, I thought she was making a joke, since A winds up at the head of a list, which sort of vanishes in air, while joining all the things that begin. All the lists, which I still believe that's what language does compile. I keep saying language when I mean the letter A, the opening act. I love how jazzy and vaudevillian the entire cast of A's are that Shannon has been working with in the past year. They tilt, they get crap on them, thrown from somewhere. They express faintly like a pencil does.
Thank you. So you know, a couple of really interesting things about that is, you know, in terms of like it's interesting as a gallery person, it's interesting to me that there's a great temptation there to say, well, that's exactly where art is being made right now. Like if you want to go to a studio visit, there's almost no place to go. But actually, the world of making has allowed for every old tradition to stay in the game. You can go to a painter studio and they're painting. You can go to a street corner and somebody's speaking. You can go anywhere and encounter all this stuff. But much new work is being made this way. This is really a space that I really never knew about anyway in my life, or the things that I've studied, which is not a lot. But before this, and it's really exciting. And it's sort of not. I don't think of that as monumental, or this, in the way that people criticize like big museums for being monumental and sort of institutional. I think of it as really sort of a generous space, actually. But also it does. I wanted to just ask you to talk a little bit about pronouns in your work, and she and they and you, in that respect. Just sort of address that question, because I know you're getting it a lot these days, and I think it's interesting. And one of the things that we spoke a little bit about this earlier, this is again a little bit of my sort of personal stuff, which is that I really, when I read your work, I really experience something different, which is not a specific concentration on something that is trying to achieve a sort of a democratic viewpoint, or an openness, or a sort of a like a flat land of equanimity. But I feel a lot like there's something that isn't there that allows all that to happen. That you really get to a place in your work that is, as I term it, as a place which is really free from judgmentalism, but where very good judgment occurs. And but that I mean technical skill in writing, but it's this thing about, like I was talking to you before about, I watched a video where Eileen is being interviewed by someone, and she's talking a lot about New York City and sort of increments and rhythms and stops and gaps, and sort of writing. The person, I think, indicates that they write from the gaps. And I was like, no, that's not what goes on here at all. There just are no gaps. Everything has texture, everything has, substance, everything has color, everything has life, everything is held, everything is loved, everything is put down and picked up again. And that place is so interesting to me. And I don't know if you can really articulate it, because it's just what you do, but so I think that has something to do with, I experience that also in some of the writing that you do, that is where there are multiple protagonists or shifting pronouns and things like that. So that's my territory for the question right there. If you, okay. Yeah, right. Just a light question.
Can you answer well, I think so many different things. But I sort of want to start with the opposite, which is I've had the experience. I didn't have to. I was fortunate enough that Amazon bought my novel Chelsea Girls, and then they optioned it, and then they hired me to be the screenwriter and adapt it, which is, could even be a hell or a heaven, because it's sort of like to take your own book and adapt it into another form is kind of tricky, and that and on the one hand it's sort of like for somebody else to do. I feel like essentially, if you take a novel and turn it into a movie, you have to destroy the novel. There's sort of no two ways about it. If you're loyal to the novel, you make a shitty film. And I can't think of that many books that I think, like Jesus' Son, I don't know if you know this book by Dennis Johnson, is a really great book that made a great movie, and I just saw We the Animals, which is out right now, is an amazing book, and the movie is phenomenal, and I think it really addresses a lot of the things, but it's sort of, so I thought, usually I have, the way I organize my reality is I make jokes of myself, and it makes sense to me, and I just thought, who better to destroy a book than the person who wrote it, So I went in there and started to do it, and what was I found that was difficult about writing a screenplay is that the whole way I operate when I write poems is that, like, it's like if you look at the first time I ever looked at I recorded a poem once in somebody's apartment when recording on computers was like new. And while I was recording the poem, a cat jumped and it made this noise. And I looked at the guy and he was like, you know? And later on, when we were doing the editing, he showed me the screen, and any of you who know about editing film, it was like there were all these stripes, and this was the sound, this was the room, and that orange bump was the cat. And he was like, we just take that out. You know, and I just saw him cut away the orange bump, and we had gotten rid of that visual track, you know? So it's just like, where am I going with that? There's a missing, okay, I just had a missing link moment.
Destroying the novel.
Right. So, okay, so it's sort of like, so when I write a poem, it's sort of like I actually, not consciously, but unconsciously, I'm making those stripes. You know, it's sort of like, there's a part where, you know, there's a part that's narration, like the character is walking down the street, the Eileen character, and it's like, and you have a line, and you write that line, but there's also the street, and the street could be Provincetown, and there's the ocean, and it's like, when do I mention the ocean? You know what I mean? And then somebody comes up to me and says something, and that's another line, and then the next line is the ocean, you know, and it's sort of like, once you get the ocean out there, people know the ocean is there, and it kind of abides through the poem, you know, and you kind of keep, you don't, like a novel is much more a creature where, you know, you have to keep it all there all the time, you know, but in a poem you're really cutting away, and you're kind of like, you're recording one track, you're shuttling, you know, you're kind of going from the narrative to the visual, and you're always jogging and tweaking and stuff. But when you write a screenplay, you can't do that. It has to all be there all the time, because what you're really handing people is a blueprint for the film, because there's like the sound people, and there's the people who bring the food, and there's the lighting people, and like all those people need to know everything that's in the film. So I showed the screenplay to an actor that I was hoping would direct it, and she goes, well, you know, it's funny. It's just like, I really thought of this book as having lots of cups of coffee and being really slow, and you know. And I said, oh yeah. And she goes, well, that's not in there. I was like, oh my God. It's like you have to put every fucking cup of coffee in there. You know. So it's sort of like the thing. I mean, like, so I'm in love with the idea of like. So that's a whole other medium, and I'm learning to write for that medium now, and it's really exciting, but it's a total different vocabulary, because the one that I know is exactly what you're talking about. It was sort of like, I want you to be making up part of the poem, you know, and it's like sometimes if you don't like my work, it's because, what the fuck is she talking about, you know, because you won't agree to do that, you know, and I feel like in a way, my work is this kind of very exaggerated, you know, but I don't say it, I just kind of assume that you'll get it and come in and keep the ocean there, because I did mention back there that the ocean is there, so you'll keep the ocean going, right? Agreeing, you know, and it's sort of like a more, I mean, because I think, I remember hearing a reading at the work center once, and it was a poet reading a poem by another poet that she revered, and it was somebody that I didn't like this person's poetry, and I thought, and I'm listening to the poem, I'm thinking it's pretty good, and it was Giordano Bruno being burned at the stake. Wow. And it was just like, and she was talking about how awful, because I think he was in something that restrained his tongue so he couldn't scream, and it was horrifying, you know, and the poem was ending, and I'm like, wow, she's really good, I like this poem. It's sort of like, and it's like, and that poem was ending, and it said, and all there was silence. And I was like, wow, very Cagean. And then she paused, and she goes, and silence was all there was. And I was like, no! You know, you already put the silence there. Don't tell us again to put the silence there. You know, so I think it's a real aesthetic thing about whether you, like, do you trust people or not? I mean, that's my feeling. If you trust people, then you let them do at least half the work for the poem. You know, and these are worlds, you know, where people, you know, think this way or not. And pronouns, I just think pronouns are always changing. You know, it's sort of like, I am female. I have female genitals, you know, but I walk through the world and I'm like queer and I'm butch, you know, and I'm as butch as you allow me in a way. And so I go, you know, you go into one deli and the person says, well, here's your coffee, sir. You know? And then the guy over here, he just glares at me. And I was like, I didn't do that. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I'm like a masculine pretender. And then I turn and somebody said, hey, lady, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you know, you have 10 encounters in a day and you keep changing gender and stuff. And it's sort of like, and I feel like all those genders. So I think for me, it's sort of like, I mean, this is, I'm not sure, you were talking perhaps about writing, but I'm probably thinking about writing and living. And it's like, so when people started to move towards using they, I thought, but that is it. they're all in there, you know? And also in the Bible, as we know, it's sort of like when Jesus was exorcising somebody, and there was like all these devils in this person, you know? And the way you do an exorcism is you look at the person who's possessed and say, speak, tell me your name, you know? And the demon came forward and said, my name is Legion, you know? And I was like, whoa, there's a lot of devils in there, you know? And it's like, that's what gender is, I think. And that's what, you know, we're in the battle of the worlds right now, right? You know, politically, because I think this is like, it's so scary, and it's so complicated, and it's so dimensional, and it's so moving, that part of the world's like, male or female, you know, and just stick to one, and, you know, shit or get off the pot. You know, it's, and I think a lot of us know that the world is so much more complicated than that, and our experiences are so wide. And, you know, it's like, it's not particularly a gay issue either. I think heterosexual people know that genders are fluid, and no relationship exists without fluid gender. You know, you just don't maybe talk about it, you know.
Thank you. I think I'm gonna try to save some time for questions.
Anybody? Yeah.
But I have just some quickies at the
okay.
end here. So we didn't get to talk about our favorite question, which was about class and art making, but it'll come up. But anyway, these are kind of just, you know, sort of wrap up lighter questions. So for you, what are you reading?
I'm reading a writer named, where's my, thank you. Her name is Miriam Gerber, and her book is called Mean. Yeah, she's amazing. She's from Los Angeles. She's kind of a fiction writer. She's a person of a mixed race background. She's queer. She's very funny, and it's like it just holds violence and tenderness and language, and it's gorgeous. I mean, the thing that's so weird is I do a lot of events. Like I'm on a book tour, so I'll go to Los Angeles, and they were like, "This is." I mean, I know this person sort of, but not really. But this is who they gave me to have a conversation with, and you know a book so well, but you've not read it. You just kind of, oh yeah, I know Miriam Gerber. Yeah. I've even probably lied and said that I've read her book. I hadn't read her book, and now I'm reading her book, and I'm like, it's amazing. It's really good. I just read a book called The Friend by, what's her name? Sigrid Nunez.
Yeah.
And it's about a man who died and left his female friend, the narrator, with this big Great Dane. You know, and it's just about dogs and relationships and loss and suicide, and really good. And just today she was nominated for the National Book Award for the long list. So a book I adore. Probably my two favorite books of the year, though. There's a novel called Red Clocks by Lainey Zumas. And it's that thing that I hate, like 5 female narrators, like, you know, every chapter she totally pulls it off. Like one is a polar explorer, one is a housewife, one is like a weird witchy character living in the woods, and an herbalist, and the leaves and the herbs and the nature is so like spot on. It's really great. And then the final book that I really love is called Paul Takes the Body of a Mortal Girl, and it's by somebody named Andrea Lawler. And it's about a changeling. It's not about a trans person or a queer person. It's about somebody who keeps changing genders. Like if they, you know, they're in a club, they see somebody hot, they think, well, unfortunately I'm a lesbian at the moment, but if I was a guy, I'd really have a, you know, goes in the bathroom, basically masturbates and turns this genital into that genital and goes out, you know, like changes their outfit a little bit and has that. I mean, it's somebody who was very into myths and gods and fantasy, and has just taken it to this amazing, it's like very cultural music and fashion, and it's very contemporary, except it's completely magical. And it was published, she's a very non-assuming person, Andrea Lawler, and she wasn't very assertive, and she published it with a really dinky little press, but it just has a buzz. And so suddenly Vintage is picking it up, and I think it's going to be a TV show, and it's just like having that wonderful thing that happens sometimes where a great book gets really acknowledged and noticed and stuff. So there's so many, I mean, I'm so excited by what's out there right now. I think it's a ton of great, I mean, everywhere I turn, I see more.
What about TV? What are you watching?
Better Call Saul is my number one. That show is Billions. I can't help it. I'm a sucker for Billions. And I started to get to Asia Kate Dalton and I have started to have a little communication. The trans character on it, and they're really great. Yeah, those are my two most recent ones. Yeah.
And last question: what is it that is? What's in the news for you right now? Like, what is it that's the news story?
Well, I haven't seen the headline, but I heard that the sexual assault with Kavanaugh got the headline, and that could put it over the top, right? I mean, we know our president is a sexual assaulter, and it doesn't seem to matter there, but I think Congress might be responsible, and they might, it's sort of like, really?
That'd be great.
So I'm just hoping the Me Too movement can go as far as to really affect the Supreme Court. That would be really amazing. I haven't seen it. A friend texted me that because I've been following that really avidly because it's a huge deal, right?
Wow.
Politics is like it's just amazing, right? We have a completely mentally ill I did order the book. I'm waiting for my copy of Fear. I'm going to read the book. I'm kind of obsessed with how bad it is, But the frightening thing though is that it could be bad. We have no government. That it could be that bad and it doesn't matter, And that's just heart wrenching. I feel like the best quote I ever heard, or one of my favorite quotes, is that countries are either comedies or tragedies, and America is a comedy. And so I feel like we're at the decline of the American empire, and look, we have a buffoon as president, and it doesn't seem to be bothering anybody at all, So it's a weird, you couldn't write this, but that's become such a commonplace to say now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and maybe you want to
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
I would really like to ask you to ask the question about class and art.
Yeah.
Or,
yeah, what was it? It was great. What was that question?
Well, it had something to do with a part of it that we really didn't get to, which was some other writing from Iceland, which is.
But I saw it and I went, wow.
Yeah, I know, we both like that, but
let me see what
it's been present. It's been present in everything. It has a little bit to do with getting to a place where you're sort of talking about, one way to approach it is to say, what is it like now to have a voice that people listen to? What is it like to start as a writer, as a young person, and then end up having a substantial experience, a substantial career? What did you learn in your early household about ethics, moral codes? Where does it take you? There's a class system and everything. And what I'm really interested in is talking about spaces is, where working artists work, what the practice is of art making, how it fits into a declining social architecture, and how class system folds in and out of that. I know that you're a person and a writer who's really concerned about class, and one of the things that I've experienced you do quite successfully repeatedly is to cut through a lot of bullshit. It's like that, the bodhisattva that's on the right-hand side of the Buddhist temples with the sword in the air, which is this, no. That's not what's happening. You're lying, that kind of thing. But that's not anything like your only energy, And I think that class is just sort of it's a fence you can walk on, and it's a road you can drive on. It's a fast car, and it's also something that will stop everything. And I just, I know you have a lot to say about it. There's no specific question in there, but it's a big part of I think what you think about. So. Well,
I think it's interesting as an I learned fairly early on that there aren't supposed to be any working class artists.
Right.
It's sort of, because it's so interesting, Lucy, famous art critic, Lucy Lepard. Yeah, she had the amazing theory about, why are there no working class artists? And I think because there is this myth that it's sort of like the middle class person has to go and then be poor for a while, in order to become an artist, and you kind of get the grittiness from being poor, and then you kind of take that authenticity and you bring it into your art practice. But if you came from working class, there's nothing more frightening than becoming poor, because that's what you were fighting your way out of, you know? And so I think for me, it's just, I think a lot of the several things. One was converting the notion of this really a feat practice, i.e. being a poet, into something that's a job, which really made, I mean, like it's sort of in a way aspiring to do the impossible, which was like, this is what I'm doing for a living, you know, which seemed like a ludicrous idea, but I do believe that if a fool would persist in their folly, they would be wise, you know, and so it certainly meant writing poems, but I think I've also, you know, cast wide the definition of what a poet is. And it's sort of like, you know, a poet is also an art critic, a poet is also a novelist, a poet is also a performance. Whatever, you know, keeping your nose on whatever the culture is, quote, buying right now, and trying to figure out how to use the skills that you learned in this, quote, small practice and apply them to a larger practice and feel entitled about that application, that it's sort of like, I mean, I think when I first started doing plays, I realized you had to find money. And when I talked to people in theater, I realized they had a much higher level of entitlement that the world needs this work. And you really have to manufacture that feeling. I feel like as a working class person, I mean, and I think silence is such a piece of the working class. I mean, when you say, what did you learn at home? I was like, I learned to shut the fuck up. You know, I learned that what I was not important, that what I was silence, that what I was, you know, like the inexpressible, you know, and it's sort of like, but we also know Billy Budd, you know, I think it's such a famous, and it's sort of like the person who stutters and can't speak, and then they do an act of violence. And I think that thing you're talking about, I think one of the things that you carry as a person from a class that's not supposed to speak is a kind of abruptness, you know, and it's sort of like, in a way you'll pay, but then in another way you'll be saying something perhaps in many situations that nobody else is capable of saying, both because nobody else knows it, but also because nobody else is compelled to express that way, because you're going from here to there, and to break through that distance, you kind of have to put, it's almost like you kind of have to make a large, broad object, you know, to break that door or break that window or whatever. So I think it's sort of like, to transition class-wise, I think you have to work with your uncomfortability, you know, and let it be part of the expression. I mean, people call it code shifting now, you know. It's just like to go from vernacular to middle class speech to, I mean, like I think when I always dated middle class women, you know, and I would meet their families and they would start asking me about my work, and I would just think they don't trust me. They think I'm a liar. They think I'm a fraud. And I thought, oh no, this is what they do. You know, and having to learn, I think as a person from a working class background, having to learn that, I mean, that we're you know, like to have this, Michael is not insulting me, you know, that it's sort of like that I'm, you know, like it's sort of like that feeling of, you know, that it's like to act as if you're entitled to share information, the person who asks for information actually wants information, you know, and to not, I mean, it's very hard, it's like to distinguish between when you need to, you know, respond with a club and when you need to respond with, you know, like just being polite and gentle, you know. And it's sort of like, I think that takes a lifetime, you know, because I feel like if you experience yourself as being from the wrong class, then you've got a vocabulary that you'll spend your life trying to learn, and you'll get it right. I mean, but everybody has this problem. You get it right, you get it wrong, but you just have to, you keep playing, right? You know, because I think America, you know, it's sort of like we are so kind of, we don't have class, right? You know, it's sort of like, who was it? Some right-wing politician was really objecting to the term middle class, thought it was really offensive. Because just the suggestion that we have a class structure in America. And it's just, and it's like, as we know, you know, we were like, you know, we're here on a continent that was, you know, we exploited the labor of kidnapped people, and then we, you know, like it's sort of like when we you know, like, look at Israel and Palestine. It was like there was nobody there, so we just took this land, you know. And it's just like, here we are, you know, on a stolen continent, you know. And I feel like it's sort of like, and that conversation has never been had in America, which is, I think, the pain of, I mean, it's the pain of class, you know. America is like this broken-hearted country that denies its own history, and so it's just, you know, it keeps, you know, kind of flushing the toilet, and the shit won't go away, you know, because, you know, it's like it's in the room with us, you know. Anything else? Any other-
I think there's nothing else to say after
I
that.
think, yeah, great. It's a beautiful day.
The ocean's up there.
Exactly. It's pretty clean.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah.